So my name is Schmitt. I'm an engineer and industrial designer, and I'm going to talk to you today about something that's been on my mind for a couple of months. And well, I hope you're going to find that interesting, and that you're going to have questions, and that it's going to inspire your work. The title of the presentation is, it's From the Cathedral to the Bazaar. It refers to a book that was written in the late 1990s called The Cathedral and the Bazaar, from Eric Raymond, who is basically one of the pioneers of the open source movement. But I've been thinking about this book more and more lately. In his book, he talks about two ways to build software. One way which is open source, and one way which is closed source, and he basically describes how to run a team, how to run a project. And I think this way of thinking is actually interesting in a broader setting, and so I'm going to try and describe to you how how we can apply it to other, like a wider subject. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with the images that I'm using on the background. Maybe you recognize Disneyland. Have you been to Disneyland? You know about it? Yes? Yes? No? Thank you. And so this is Burning Man. Does it ring a bell? Have you seen maybe images of it? It's a festival in the Nevada desert. Does it ring a bell? Yes? 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 Okay. So why I find interesting is, for me, those two images kind of highlight the cathedral on one side and the bazaar on the other side. And what I find interesting is that you could be describing those projects with the same words, basically. Somehow they have the same mission. You could say they both want their users to live like an unbelievable experience, basically. And yet they have two very different ways of doing it. And so that's what I'm going to try and get into today with examples of projects. So why I find that interesting is that I work at a company today called The Camp. Maybe you've heard of it. I don't know. It's like an innovation campus in the south of France. So this is obviously like a 3D rendering. That's what the place is supposed to look like. That's kind of what it looks like today, but we've only opened for 4 months, so we're still it's still very early, and we're still learning. But what we discovered is that the place has been designed more as a cathedral, and what we're trying to do today inside, the projects that we're trying to run inside are more on the bazaar side. And so I'm today very interested in how we can mix the bazaar and the cathedral, or how we can go from the cathedral to the bazaar. So I've got some very basic statements before we get started, before we dive in. So the first one is free beer is different as free speech. So they both are free, but one of them is, we would say, gratuit in France. Free speech means libre. And you need to keep in mind that everything that is open source isn't free, and everything that is free isn't open source, and they're two different things. Yeah. And so I'm not going to focus only on open source, but I think it's important to put some basics before we get started. And so open source isn't like a small project, like it's a massive part of the web. Everything today on the web runs on open source, uses open source. Even giant companies, Google, they're involved in at least 2,000 open source projects. Facebook contributes to open source projects, so it's it's like a massive part of the web and a massive part of the industry now. So I've just put together two kind of words that we can associate to the cathedral or the bazaar. I'm going to get into it with examples, but there are basically two different ways to do this, to achieve the same goal. So one of them is more about control, supervision, and communication, as in what I mean by communicate is more like top-down communication, controlled communication. So protect your IP, protect your rights, your creation, and so on. Opacity, it means you don't want people to know how it works. Standardization, this one is a really important one, I think, is you want everyone to have exactly the same experience. Basically, someone who came to Disneyland 10 years ago and someone who comes today, they're going to have exactly, or very closely, the same experience. And the people who come in have more of like a consumption position, basically, posture. And on the other side, so we try to allow people to do stuff based on trust, mobilized rather than communicate, share, transparency, emergence, I'm going to get into it a bit later, and participation, I think, is an important one as well. It means everyone who comes to Burning Man actually participates. They're not only users. So, what does a bazaar look like? Obviously, these are two extreme examples, but it's not like black and white. There's a very wide range of projects, and I'm not telling you, oh, you should be a bazaar entirely, or you should be a cathedral entirely. It's just that there is a granularity in between, and you need to think about it when you run a project. I don't know if you guys can read it, but so the first one is porous organizational boundaries. So in the bazaar, it's not very clear who's in or who's out, and that's a very new way to think about collaboration in big companies, basically. Because it used to be, okay, you're either an employee or you're outside of the company, and now it's changing, and so the ways to interact with companies are going to become very porous. So encourage initiatives, so that means in the bazaar you want people to take basically responsibility for projects and take initiatives and help them take initiatives. Minimize friction, it's like the second part of the previous one. It means if you want people to take initiatives, you've got to remove boundaries at every step, basically, and minimize everything that's going to prevent them from participating or contributing. Decentralized governance and turned around on those who make. That's what we also call a duocracy, which means it's the people who make who are right, basically. If you're making it, you're right, rather than okay, we need to talk about it and then make an action plan and decide who's going to work on it. And it's basically if you think it's right and if you're able to make, then do it, and you're right. Few rules, but deeply shared. I'm going to give a few examples later in the presentation on that aspect. I think it's a very important aspect in the maker culture and open cultures. Dissemination of information. Okay, obviously, a bazaar is always going to try and share what they do. Divergence, so that means within a project there can be offsprings, and people can use the project and transform it into something else, and that's something we see a lot in the bazaar. And strong sense of belonging. bazaars that work well basically have yeah, very strong sense of belonging for the people who are in them. Does that make sense? Yeah? Do you understand my English? So there's another metaphor that works quite well, I think, and I've done this presentation in front of big corporations, and they like the idea of having words like a vocabulary that they can use, bazaar and cathedral, that they can apply to their work. And one metaphor that they understand really well also is the one around music. So on the left is like a very centralized concert, so everyone is basically playing their own part, and we've got the chief that is running everything, and then there's people in the audience who are just passively watching. And on the other side, you've got what we could call a music jam. And on this side, so people are sitting very differently, and it's not very clear who's in the audience and who's actually participating. And the roles might not be very clear, and they have different rules. If you go to one jam or to another jam, maybe they don't play in the same way. In one, they might go one after the other. In another one, they might have rules like, okay, when someone plays a tune, you have to use it, and then until someone else plays another tune or whatever. So what it helps people figure out is, so what roles do you need and how are they actually represented? What are the competencies that you need? Because you might not be the same. It might not be the same musicians you're looking for in one side or in the other. And I was saying, yeah, like what rules, what structure, and maybe what tools as well. Because in this one they all have very professional tools. On the other side, maybe someone actually just taps on a chair and then it starts making music, and so you can have tools that are very a lot easier to use. And so here are a few things that I want to talk to you about in the examples that are going to be coming just after. So there's something about emergence, something about commons, so things that we can share. Fork, so how people can use a project and modify it for another use. Transparency, system thinking. I think this one, I mean, if you're interested in design, I mean, for me this thing is very interesting. And engagement, which is basically a different way of bringing people into your project. So the first example that I want to show you is called Lego Ideas, and it's basically a way for Lego to have people create or imagine new Lego builds and then suggest them and then bring them to the market. So Lego is like, okay, people really like our product, and some people outside do like crazy things with our Legos, but we could hire them, but they're hard to find, or maybe they're not looking for a job, and somehow there is more intelligence outside of the company than there is inside. So they're saying, okay, how can we leverage this intelligence and give them tools to contribute? And they started with a platform that they brought in Japan at the beginning, that was called Lego Cusco, and so they tried it for a year, then it worked really well. They got really interesting projects out of it that they brought to the market, that they sold to clients, and so they were like, okay, we can bring it to the next step and make it worldwide and have people contribute. And so now it really it's working. I mean, they have people contributing lots of different ideas, and then some of them they bring to the market and they sell like normal Lego sets. So it's like crowdsourcing, if you're familiar with the word, I guess. So this one, I don't know if you've heard about it, but it's a party game, basically, that was made by a guy from the Oatmeal. I don't know if you've heard of it, it doesn't matter. And this is their Kickstarter page. So this one was the most funded game on Kickstarter, and so it's nearly $9 million. And you're like, okay, so how did they manage to gather that much money and that much people around on their game? Which, I mean, I haven't tried. It looks really fun, but like 9 million is a lot of money. And one way, like if you look at how many commentaries they got on their project, so here it reads about 110,000 comments. So they managed to gather a really big community around their project. I mean, most Kickstarter projects have maybe 500, 1,000, and they have like 100,000. And instead of running their project like normal Kickstarters and have extended goals, okay, if we reach that many contributors, we go to the next level, blah, 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 we unveil a new color for our product. They basically run extensions within the game, so they were like, okay, if during the weekend we have 5 different people sending us pictures of them disguised as Batman in a jacuzzi, then we will add a new card to our game. And so people were actually playing, and they wanted to add those new cards, and so they contributed, both these guys took pictures and sent them on Twitter, and so there was some kind of buzz effect, we could say, that meant that more people wanted to participate, and so that's how they managed to engage and build such an impressive community. So one other aspect of running like crowdsourcing or crowdfunding that I find really interesting is how it can be used for actual fabrication. So this is OpenDesk. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's basically furniture. So they make furniture out of wood with the similar machines that you have back there. And what is interesting is that those machines, they use digital files, so it means they can be shared on the internet, and the machines are pretty much all the same, so it means once you have the file, it can be made all over the world, and that's what they're using. They're building a network of people who can build their equipment and their furniture, and also people who can contribute and bring a new propose new projects, new objects. Lately, they're using basically distributed fabrication, and they're also using something called make it or buy it, which means on their website you can either buy the furniture, and they're going to connect you to one of the guys, one of their producers that lives next to where you live, and they're going to send them the file so that they can build it for you. But you can also just download the file for free. And lately they've used, raised money also using their own contributors. So this is a project we worked on in 2013, so it's really not up to date. but it shows something that I find really interesting, which is the aspect of fork in open source projects. So this is one of the early 3D printers that was started in Bath in 2005. And so there was some guy, Adam Bauer, had an idea that he could make a 3D printer that could replicate itself. So the idea was that those parts could be 3D printed and all of the other parts are just standard, and so that you can actually build other 3D printers from one 3D printer. So there is actually an idea of evolution, and so the second one was called Darwin, with this idea. And then this is, he shared his files and he shared his idea and so on. And so these are all different projects that used his base to build something else with it. And so you can see how it goes really quickly into a big tree, and all of the guys that are actually building other 3D printers and making it better somehow, they're also sharing their own files and so on, and so everything becomes, everyone benefits from it. And that's really what kickstarted the 3D printing, well, personal 3D printing that we have now, and that allows us to have really cheap 3D printers and really that works really well. And so not all of them are free, not all of them are entirely open source, and some of them are just used by companies to sell products. So this is a MakerBot here, and I'm not sure what you have here as 3D printers, but they're definitely somehow descendants of this first 3D printer. And so, just to say that, once again, open source isn't really something only for hippies. The big companies are also looking at it and are also using it. And one that I find really interesting is Tesla. So you might have heard of Tesla and Elon Musk, I guess. You're familiar with the person. And so they make electric cars, right? And you could say, okay, they have some really important IP that they want to protect, they want to keep to themselves. And basically in 2014, they decided that all their patents would be made open source. So they're not using patents anymore. And so you could say, okay, that's like a weird idea or whatever. But if Elon Musk is doing that, there is a business opportunity behind it. I mean, he's not doing it for like making the world better or whatever. So what they're thinking behind it is that they're already far ahead of their competition, and by sharing their files and by sharing their patents, people can use what they've done and then create an ecosystem around it, and so make them a reference, basically. So if everyone starts using their own systems, then it means there is an ecosystem that is going to build around them, and they're going to last longer, potentially. And in this idea of fork and using projects for different ways or different things that they weren't made for at the beginning, this is a project that I find really inspiring. He's French, and he's Gaël Langevin. He's making robots that are 3D printed and mechanized and that are human-like. And so he's developing these robots using with a community around him. And what's interesting is that some people have started being like, okay, your robot is great, but I only want to use part of it for this or this project or this one. And especially people with disabilities or missing hands, were like, oh, we could use just this part of the robot and make it better and use it to make prostheses for disabled people. And so this means the project is actually changing form, and some people are making only this part better, but they're also contributing to the rest of the robot by doing that and using it as something that really wasn't meant for at the beginning. And it's starting businesses also, because it means they can start and make processes that are going to be cheaper and that people can build on their own. And so it brings, it's better for the economy as well, better for people who weren't able to buy processes cheaper than like thousands of dollars, and now they can. So it's inspiring. This one I'm showing because it's one way of working and involving a community is to actually have a community for this, for that uses your product and that exists on the web somewhere, but that is different from your company. And so this is a community that is called DIY Drones, and the company behind it is called 3D Robotics, and so they're actually building professional drones, but they're using the community and the way they're transforming their products and the way they're contributing to the drones to make them better, to actually make some kind of loop that is beneficial for everyone. One other aspect, or one other example would be what MakerBot, so the guys who do 3D printers, have been doing with Thingiverse, that you might be familiar with, which is like a library of 3D printable files. And so this means they have the community and the company, and both of them are actually, well, benefiting from each other. So you might have used Arduino as well. So you're familiar with what it is, right? So it's like a microchip controller. It's been around for about maybe 12 years, I'd say. And what's interesting is that it hasn't really changed in shape, because when it came out, it started by giving away all their plans, so making it open source, and they started basically a system, a framework, so that a lot of people were then able to build shields and plugins, basically other products that could be added to this product. And so they created an ecosystem of other companies and other contributors around them, and that helped make their product better and better and better. So in terms of, so this is what I call a system thinking, and this is another example that came out. It's very simple, but I like it because I think it shows very simply and elegantly how you can engage people and think in terms of system rather than a product. So it was made by a design studio called Pollen in the west of France, and it basically uses transparent. So the idea was to make a logo for a library that does that basically enables citizens to come up with projects and develop their projects and collaborative projects. And so they needed an identity, a visual identity that could be basically infinite, or that could be used to make as many new projects as possible. And so what they've done is just have this idea of 3 different layers and they have a lot of different, so 3 colors and a lot of different shapes, and then the citizens can just make their logos for whatever projects they want by just adding those layers onto each other. And so what the design studio, what they've done is just hear the need, and then they were like, okay, we need to create a framework, and that is going to allow anyone to be a designer on their own in their own way. Something that's been really important or inspiring also for open project is the way they use transparency. And so this is an example with Bootstrap. So it's the Bootstrap page on GitHub. So I don't know, maybe it's just a technical language for you, but so Bootstrap is a framework on the internet, a web framework that is being used by a lot of people. GitHub is a place where you can drop code, and so this is just people using Bootstrap and being like, okay, I've got a problem with this on iOS, or there's a problem with this button, blah 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 blah, and so starting from there, so this is the number of open issues and the number of issues that have been resolved. And then this is used by the community to just try and make the project better. And I'm just trying to imagine what it would mean if Renault started to have like an open issues, or well, any company, any big company that you know around you, what would it mean for them to share the problems that they have openly, and have people trying to contribute to them. I think that's I think that's one way of showing how transparency can projects can benefit from transparency. And if you push it to the limit, I mean, you can really have citizens contribute to different projects, to your projects. And so this one is an example. It's called Smart Citizen. It started in Barcelona, and what it started as is basically a microchip controller to build your own weather station. So it's been built in Fab Labs, and what they want with it is that people would buy them and then put them in their homes, and they can start contributing data to a public data repository. So what's the weather like? What are the problems with sounds? And so other people can then use this data and analyze it, and people can also contribute to the product itself, the microchip, and make it better. So that more people can use it and more people can contribute to data and to making their city better. So this is I think my last example. I think it's interesting to talk about culture and what it means for people in the open community. And so this is just a screenshot from a place that is called Rickers. It used to be Hacker School. It's basically a place in New York for a hacker residency, basically where people learn to code. And this is their user manual page. So it's where they explain how you can use the space, how you can contribute, and so on. All the page is interesting, but I've just captured this picture that is from their space, and it shows the 4 rules that they've applied to their space. Like I said earlier, in what Bazaar looks like, it's basically have very few rules, or as few rules as possible, but very well enforced. And in this one page, they explain really well how they arrive to those 4 rules and what they mean, and how these rules actually define the culture that they want to build within their space. So they're all linked to coding and development and software, but I think it's interesting whatever you're coming from. So no failing surprise means you're not allowed to, when someone comes up with a question or an idea or whatever, and you're not allowed to be like, oh, how come you don't know that? And pretend you're surprised, basically. No one actually means you're not allowed to, answer well actually when someone tells you something, because it's just a way of showing you're slightly better than them and downplaying them. No backseat driving means when 2 people are coding or discussing about code, you can't be on your computer on the other side of the room and just hear them talk and then be like, oh yeah, try that, and you're either trying to fix the problem or not, and keeping to yourself. And no subtleisms, so well, that's basically staying away from racism, sexism, and so on. So there's no good isms, and try not hide them in subtle ways of telling them. I've been involved in a project called EMLYON for about 8 years now, and so it's a community that is based around a hackathon that happens in museums once a year. So we gather people from different backgrounds, bring them in a museum for 3 days, and have them build basically prototypes around what's the idea of the museum that they would like to see. And it's now an international project. We're in 20 countries and with a lot of people involved. And what we've learned is how we can think of our project in a way that can engage more and more people as it goes. And so we have these 4 different levels, and that we try and think about when we develop new ideas in EMLYON. So the first one is observation. We need to make sure people see what is happening, and that we need to show what's being done. Participation, obviously. So we have participants, people who come in the museum, but it's this step is a lot different. Is how you can, you came, you participated in the project, or in your project, very good, very well, but then how can you become a contributor and actually contribute to the bigger project, to the community itself. And then activation, which is how you can become actually one of the heavy users who are going to help all the other ones contribute and get to the next step. And that's the end for me. And so this obviously, so this presentation is on the web, and you can hack it